It's not on a resume. You get this when you meet with somebody, and it's the ability to get along. I feel like it's so easy sometimes as auditors to go, oh, well, here's the policy, and did you do it or not do it, right? We can be very kind of a black and white world. And sometimes we get this police mentality, right? Where we're like, hey, we've told you this and you need to do it, right? You need somebody that can collaborate and collaborate with the team you're working with, but also with the auditee.
This episode is brought to you by Greenskies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Greenskies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Greenskies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show, we have Aaron Gagnon. He's the Chief Audit Executive at McKinsey. And when I was talking to Aaron before the show, he mentioned this saying of show up and try. That's like a mantra that he lives his life by, or at least his work life for sure. And, a lot of times we hear things like that on the show and just naturally as in our kind of day to day. And you kind of go, all right, this sounds like something that your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or something posted on Facebook. And you went, I got to go on this show. That's the first thing that popped in my head. Yeah, let's run with that. Aaron definitely lives that and goes into a lot more detail on it. And it was pretty inspiring. Like I said, those are the kinds of things you typically read as you're scrolling through social media and you go, show up and try. Yeah, okay, cool. Keep scrolling. So really, really interesting how Aaron actually lives that though. And so that's within the first, 5-10 minutes. Highly recommend making sure you stick around at least, stick around for 10 minutes. I don't think that's too much to ask for. And then Aaron's strategy for hiring is pretty unique in terms of especially the years of experience and what he looks for when he does hire. And so we talk about that strategy in general. I think it's really important for those that are listening who are looking elsewhere, because I would probably work for Aaron. I think as you listen to this, you'll understand why. This is probably one of the most just straight up conversational shows we've ever done. And I feel like most of them are conversational. That's one of the biggest pieces of feedback we get. Just feels like we're just having a conversation. And I would say is even more so with Aaron as we went through this. But then we also talk about, okay, aside from experience and those types of things, what qualities do you look for when you're hiring? Again, if you're looking to move, then you kind of have the inside track on what Aaron's looking for if he has an open position. And then what the number one issue that Aaron's talking to his CAE peers about. And as an auditor, as a CAE, we have to have all these different relationships with the C-suite, the board, audit committee, chairs, management, staff, etc. And so Aaron gives a really enlightening answer to basically, how do you deal with all those relationships? How do you handle those? How does your communication change for those, etc.? So with that said, here we go. Well, what is in either or your internet browsing history or your ChatGPT history, or maybe your Lily history? And if maybe you want to speak to Lily a little bit for people like, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah, I could talk about Lily. I probably won't go into my history on there because I think that'd be a little too specific to our situation. But yeah, I'll probably say it wrong, but that's our wrapped version of ChatGPT that gives us the environment where we can put all our data into it, and we don't have to worry about that getting exfiltrated anywhere else. So it's been awesome. We've been working with that, and that's been kind of a fun journey. I know you helped us a little bit with some training on that, and our team's been really trying to use that. It's great because you get all that functionality, plus we can put our own stuff in there and not worry about it. So it's been really good for us. So that's been a good journey for us so far. So if I think about my Google search history, a lot of it has to do right now with the Olympics. But being an accountant by trade, where does the IOC money go? How much do the IOC members get paid per year? Where's all the revenue go? Who's getting rich on the Olympics? So there's a whole bunch of those. It's not fun stuff. It's the local Jeep dealership. It's Walmart. So plug in for them. Atlanta Braves. How do you paint your wooden fence? It's on my list. We're going to Acadia National Park. There's a whole bunch of Acadia National Park stuff. Yusuf Daitek. I don't know how you say the guy, but the guy in the Olympics, it was the shooter.
Okay. Yeah.
A shooter, but
was the
meme.
Olympian, the Olympic meme guy. Yeah.
The 50-year-old guy who has no stuff. I mean, you see that and you're like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Look, who does he work for, right? So, So, a lot of stuff on Katie Ledecky. Who is she? Things that I don't know much about. How do you type German characters on an English keyboard?
Of course.
The Grand Hyatt in Cancun Beach.
So you're going through your whole list right now, aren't you? Yeah.
Fonda San Miguel, which is one of my favorite restaurants in Austin. Just shout out anybody that knows Austin. It's one of the older restaurants. It's really good. I do not get paid by them for anything, but Heine's Milk and Cookies. Actually, the next one starts up a whole bunch of restaurants. Female Foodie is also awesome.
I think there's an audit conference in Austin. I'm not sure if we're going to hit this before it publishes. So,
ERC conference or something.
Yeah,
right?
I believe so. So good recommendations there. I'm curious from
Female Foodie's a great one to look up. Look up her website. She does a great job. She's not everywhere, but the cities that she's in, I've never been disappointed with her restaurant choices.
Who was that?
Called Female Foodie.
Oh, I'm kind of curious from all the Olympic stuff that you looked into. Was there anything where you went, oh, that's super interesting? Is there anything like that you could share?
I think where all the money goes. That was the thing because you can see I went down a rabbit hole. So we're sitting there on the couch watching the Olympics. I'm like, I'm really curious about this. It says that those people don't get paid anything and that they're volunteers, but I have a hard time believing that. And my skeptical auditor mind says this is ripe for corruption. But I think that's pretty well documented that there's some issues there in the past. So
I think big global sporting events have a pretty. I'm not a huge soccer fan, but they have a bit of a history of that. So you're probably right. Well, I'm reading. It's like the history of the Olympics or something like that, and it's a relatively massive read, probably like 16 hours. And so I haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm in, I think, the 1904 Olympics right now. So I haven't gotten into a lot of the corruption stuff yet, but it is certainly. But even then, what it was in St. Louis, there was some kind of, it was supposed to be in Chicago, and basically St. Louis bullied them into giving it to St. Louis. So I think there was probably some corruption from the jump on that one. Okay. That's our Olympic update for the day. I think that was good. That was perfect. All right.
Well, can I just end that on a positive note real quick? The other thing I thought was super interesting is they were showing, when I was looking at this, one of the things they were showing on some of the results was, I think it was the 100-meter race, and they showed I think it was Carl Lewis's time in 88 or whatever, and then they showed the person who was in last place this year, actually a better time than Carl Lewis. He got the gold medal, saying just how fast everybody has become in some of these sports. So that's kind of an amazing thing. So just kind of leave a little bit more positive, just at the performance of the athletes and how, just all that they're able to accomplish and improve on.
Okay. I like the positive note. That's a good way to walk through life. I like that. All right. When we talked before this, you said this phrase, you said, show up and try. And I can't remember the question I asked you that you gave me that answer. Like, what should we all do? Something to that effect. And you said, show up and try. What do you mean by that? And how, if people show up and try, how does that help them then improve? What do you mean by show up and try?
So it's funny, I have this yellow sticky, which I guess is not going to show up because I've got my blur screen on, but it says show up and try. And then the second half says every day, even if you fail. And so I've had this sticky by my computer for over 10 years now.
The same.
It's the same sticky. Like, I've changed companies and I just bring the sticky with me everywhere I go. I mean, it's obviously doesn't stick anymore. So
yeah,
it's out in front of there. And it's the advice I've given a lot of people, including my own kids, quite honestly, is when I say show up and try, I mean, I'm just saying, like, listen, two things. One is physically, right? And then the other one is maybe mentally and emotionally. So the physically is I still think it's important to be places on time. It's still important to be wherever it is you need to be. Now, I know we've got people that work remotely. You got people who have to be in offices. I'm just saying, if you need to be at a meeting, show up early. If you need to be in the office, show up before everybody else gets there. And just, because it doesn't have to be a lot. Like if the start time's 8:30, get there at 8:20. What does 10 minutes mean, right? It's not a big deal, right? But just show up, be ready. And then the other thing when I say show up is like, there's so many distractions nowadays with, you get your phone, you have all kinds of personal things that are coming across, especially I use all Apple devices because I used to work for Apple. And, so some of this stuff shows up on my work, I'm getting my personal text messages are showing up on my work device, right? And so I think just trying to focus on, hey, I'm here. I've got this time that I need to focus on work. I should focus on work and not be distracted by a million other things. Social media, text messages from friends and family. I mean, you have to have some balance, but I think just trying to do that. And the second part of this is, and try every day, because you know what, sometimes it's like, I feel like you can get done with the day and go, nothing productive happened. Or it was a total bust, right? It's okay. Get up tomorrow, show back up, get there, whatever it is. Maybe it's, sitting at home, show up, or maybe it's in an office, show up, whatever it is. And just focus on trying to make progress every day.
I think the focus thing is super important, and because of notification, social media, death scrolling, for those that are familiar with that, where you open Instagram or whatever it is, and then 20 minutes have gone by and your life is no better and it's probably worse at that point, and you just get to a point in there and you go, why am I even doing this? Is an addiction for pretty much everybody, I would say. Do you have wow, we're about to go. I'm glad this is the Audit Podcast. If I ask this any other way, people are like, what are you talking about? Do you have controls that you put in place to mitigate against that risk? I have some. And so if you're like, nope, I'm just a stud at this, I just crush it every single day because I've been doing this philosophy for 10 years straight.
No, I fail every day and I just keep trying the next day. So
what a stud.
I've done that. I mean, like you say, you're sitting there and you're like, you open up whatever your social media of choice is, and you just start scrolling through it. And to your point, 20, 30 minutes later, you're like, okay, now, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Most of this half is freaking ads. It's not stuff I want to see anyways, but that's a whole nother point to get annoyed about. But
okay. So for those that are interested, there's apps. I use one called Freedom, and it basically blocks email. Is a nightmare for me. I get stuck in email constantly, LinkedIn, social media in general, and it just blocks all that stuff. So I basically, the only thing I can use is Google to research something, or ChatGPT or something like that. And you can set a timer so it locks for an hour at a time. And that way it's even if I wanted to check my phone, there's nothing I can do about it. The next step that I took 2 weeks ago, there's a box. It's, you can't really see it. It's on this back here. It's a physical box that I can then put my phone in and lock the box. So if I want to get it out, I have to put a code in. And it's not that big of a deterrent, but in my brain goes, are you really about to go through that just to get your phone and look at, what are you going to look at, Trent? What are you even doing this for? And so it's just another level. You can also, with this thing, you can lock it to where there is no code that gets you out. So if you say it's locked for 2 hours, the only way to get the code is to email customer support. And they say, we might get back to you in 24 hours. And so you're you don't have a choice. You have to wait those 2 hours. So maybe extreme for some, but maybe also needed for some.
Seeing that you had to put these controls in place, I did have a question. Do you need to be a day drinker?
No.
Because if you have to set these controls up, I hope that you have a locked liquor cabinet somewhere and it's not just sitting on the back of your desk.
The rule in the house is if we keep alcohol in the house, it will get drunk. So we don't keep alcohol in the house very much.
Oh, that's actually, yep, I get that. That makes sense.
I've done a lot of reading on habits and things of that nature and how to avoid all the basically dopamine drips that are so addictive to people. But the other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about being on time is just kind of fate, serendipity, whatever you want to call it. I never missed a single class when I was in college. I never skipped a class. I was sick a couple times, so I didn't make it, but I never just skipped a class. And I was rarely late to any class, kind of to your point. I was late to this C++ class. It was the second day. Couldn't remember how to get to the class. I don't know.
I was the last one in there. There was one seat available. There was 4 seats at each computer, basically. And so I was the last one there. So I just sat at that seat and kind of, like once you have your seat, that's where you sit for the rest of the semester kind of thing. The person I ended up sitting beside is the person I ended up marrying about 8 years later.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So in being late to that class, it ended up kind of working out for me.
Well, maybe that's sometimes there's providence, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but no, I like your show up and try. I think it's a fantastic philosophy.
I'm going to say one more thing about that, because I think it's interesting when we say show up and try, because I think sometimes people just get discouraged, right? You go to work and you get discouraged. You feel like, oh, I'm not having an impact. I'm not making a difference or whatever. And then they just are like, well, I'm just going to do, like, I'm just not going to, like, some people call it quiet quitting or something like that. Like, so that's the thing you got to try to avoid. That is a death spiral.
Yeah.
That just leaves you to no place good, right?
Yeah.
So it's just really just, you got to put some effort, and if that effort's not working out, try something different. Like maybe it's time for you to make a change. If it's that bad every day, maybe you shouldn't be doing that job anymore. Maybe
some kind of change for sure. Yeah,
kind of change. Yeah,
and either your habits or a profession or something. Yeah, I like that. You got to throw a wrench in there and mix it up a little bit. I know another thing that we've talked about is you don't hire a lot of junior people. It's, hey, you got to have a lot of experience to come work on this team. You probably have more years of experience per person than most internal audit departments, and certainly not a relatively small team. Why do you do it that way? Why do you hire that way? And do you think it's sustainable to, when you have to backfill, to just keep doing that?
Well, luckily for me, the accounting firms train people and then chew them up and spit them out. So that's been a model that's worked well for quite some time. And so even when I was at Apple, same sort of thing. We only really hired people that had 5+ years experience. And I would say here we've got people with 10+ years experience at McKinsey. And a lot of people, quite honestly, have stayed in the group. We have not had a lot of turnover, which is why our team, I think, has aged a little bit more and gotten a little bit more tenured from an experience perspective. So I'd love to think it's because I'm an amazing person to work with and nobody wants to leave, but I've only been there 2 years, and some of those people a lot longer. So I know I can't take credit for that, but yeah, I think for us at I saw this a little bit at Apple and McKinsey. It's even more concentrated. But when you think about internal audit and the people that you're dealing with, now taking SOX out of that, SOX is kind of a different thing. So if your team does SOX, you do some of these other things, you can be very much in the weeds and you deal with lots of people within the organization. I would say for more operational audits that are done, you tend to end up working with people at, when as at Apple, you're working with people at the VP level, senior director level. At McKinsey, we're working with a lot of partners and senior partners. And so you really need somebody that can kind of hold their own a little bit in these conversations. Somebody that has a little bit more experience. I mean, think about McKinsey, these people we're dealing with, they consult with and look at company, like the most prestigious companies around the world, right? That's who their clients are and that's who they deal with. And so we really need people with that kind of a caliber that can come and have those conversations. So that's been super helpful. I would say the other thing that's been interesting on this is our firm doesn't do internal audit services, right? So we don't have internal audit experts, but we do have a risk and resiliency practice. And so I get calls every month from client serving teams that are like, hey, we have this internal audit question. I looked up the internal directory. You seem to be an expert in this space. Can you help us, right? And so that's been an interesting thing in this, working at McKinsey, is this kind of other avenue of kind of back to some client service. Not that I own it, but being brought in as an expert, or also bringing in people on my team as experts. So we've got 2 people right now that are getting ready to work on a client project where they needed somebody with our particular expertise. And so we're bringing that to the table, which has been interesting. So that also, I think, is kind of also why I think having more tenured folks in our team is maybe than where I've worked before has been very helpful and had a big benefit to team the prior.
That's got to feel kind of rewarding. People reaching, when they reach out and go, hey, for a client, I need your help with this, and helping understand, whatever it is from the audit perspective. So that's unique. I haven't heard that before. The other thing I was curious about, and I didn't think about this, if it was a if you had like a decent size amount of SOX work that would be done, I think there it would make sense to go, yeah, we can go junior there, or compliance work in general, because it's, for the most part, it's the same thing every, quarter or year. That's relatively easy to teach, and you don't have to be able to have those VP level conversations necessarily with individual control owners on something like SOX. So I think if someone goes, oh, we got a mix of SOX and ops, then yeah, and you want to take that approach, I think it makes sense to go ops side. Then yeah, we're probably going to go people with a little bit more experience. And on the SOX side, like, we can kind of fill those roles with more junior type folks. What do you think about that?
I totally agree with that, because what you do is you have last year's work papers also to rely on. You're like, oh, we know how this process is supposed to work. We know how the control is supposed to work. And so you kind of have something. When some of the operational audits, the challenge is it's a blank piece of paper, right? And you're like, you just show up and it's like, all right, we're going to audit this process. Well, what is this? Like, you starting from nothing, right? And so that, I think, needs people more tenure. When you have something that it's repeatable, and not just SOX, I think there are some operational audit areas that, you can say, okay, well, we look at this third-party intermediaries every year, right? Or we built this into an office, a location audit or something. I think those lend themselves to more of a kind of all levels within a team. So and honestly, as our team grows, we will probably build out a little bit more of that, but still not kind of that very most junior level. Now, I don't know, if you have a team of 200 people, I can also understand that, but you're also probably dealing with some of those repeatable processes or repeatable audits that you can leverage a bit easier. So totally agree with that.
All right. So for those that are listening, they're probably like, you know what? Aaron does sound awesome, and I do want to work with Aaron. So to give them a head start, and let's say they have the experience, and they go, I wonder what else does Aaron look for in hiring that I can like put on the resume and speak to? What else do you look for?
It's not on a resume. You get this when you meet with somebody, and it's the ability to get along. I feel like it's so easy sometimes as auditors to go, oh, well, here's the policy, and did you do it or not do it, right? We can be very kind of a black and white world. And sometimes we get this police mentality, right? Where we're like, hey, we've told you this and you need to do it, right? You need somebody that can collaborate, and collaborate with the team you're working with, but also with the auditee. I kind of step back, in the way I kind of approach this with our team and what I'm looking for people who are coming into the team. I kind of look at audits and say, hey, every process, every function at a company is on a journey. And so whatever the maturity of that function is, and think about control maturity in that same way, right? And so it's like, hey, can you come in with an attitude that says, hey, here's where you're at today on a 1 through 5 scale. You're at 2. I'm trying to help you get to 3. And you know what? In 3 years from now, I may come back and try to help you get from 3 to 4, right? And so someone who can have that approach. And you get that when you start talking to somebody for 30, 40 minutes. You can kind of get a good sense of how's their approach to internal audit. Is there audit? Are you approaching it as, hey, I'm the hammer, I'm here to make sure everybody does it right? Or are you there to say, hey, how do I get people to the right place? One caveat in that is sometimes I give everybody the benefit of the doubt that people are just trying to do the right thing. When I get evidence to the contrary, then you go down a very different path. Once you get on that fraud train, it's a very different approach. But I think you always have to give people the benefit of the doubt until you see evidence to the contrary. So collaborative, but also someone that can, if you see fraud, be okay saying, hey, I think this is what it is. And you also have to have people that handle it the right way. Because some people think like, well, what I saw is fraud, and no matter what anybody else says, forget it. And you're second year out of, college, and you're like, oh, I've identified fraud. But in reality, if you talk to someone that's been around for 10 or 15 years and go, okay, these are the pieces you're missing, right? And so someone that can kind of deal with those situations.
Yeah, I think data people would tell you they're very good at going, oh, that's fraud, but then recognizing that most of the time it's not. So many times I've looked at a data set and gone, clearly this is fraud, handed it back to the audit team and go, hey, this, look into this. They're like, totally fine. It's just whatever. It's an outlier for XYZ or something like that. But you kind of have to get used to that. The ups and downs of, I found it. And then no, definitely not. You just need to understand the business better. From my experience.
But a collaborative approach does it, right? If you kind of go in and say, I'm giving someone the benefit of the doubt, because like to your point, you kick something out and you're like, gosh, what else could this be, right? You're like, this is for sure a problem. And then you go talk to somebody and you get some additional information or some documents, talk to some other people to corroborate that, and you're like, actually, no, this is fine. Here's why it pops out weird.
Right.
You know, sometimes there's an explanation. Sometimes there's not.
Disney trips on corporate credit cards. First time I went, clearly fraud.
Yeah.
And then they went, no, there's a conference down there. I went, oh, yeah, that does make sense. I've been at a conference down there, too. So I probably had the same transaction at some point in my life. So,
yeah,
all
exactly. Right. Things like that. Now, that being said, I came across one in Japan, which might be a whole other story. It's a $180 million fraud for a U.S. public company. Their subsidiary in Japan, which has now gone through all the courts and has gone through the SEC. So I feel like I can talk about it now. But yeah, I mean, and that was as simple as somebody looking at, it was a staff who looked at a cash confirmation that had some whiteout on it and came back and said, is this okay?
Right.
And went to the right person who said, no, it's not. Actually, it was me and another Japanese partner. We said, hey, why don't you call the bank and just call the local branch and just confirm. And when you called the local branch, you got a different story than what was on the paper. So, yeah. So things happen. But that's, you know, I tell you 99.9% of the time, it's usually fine.
Right. that from my experience and looking at the data, that's how it is too.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's, maybe your answer is fraud, or maybe it's hiring or something else that we've talked about. But amongst your CAE peer groups, what's kind of the number one issue, hot topic that you guys have been talking about?
The ESG reporting has been an issue because we're all kind of going through that for sure. Regulators. Regulators has been a big issue, right? So I think I saw this when I was at Apple. I definitely see it at McKinsey as well, and talking with other CAEs. Regulators have gotten more interested in what we're doing, more interested in kind of making their presence known. You could argue,
as you say that, is there a group of regulators, or just kind of blanket?
I would say in general, it depends on who you are and what they're interested in. So PCAOB obviously has been very active. The SEC has been more active. The Department of Justice has been more active. The European Union, various organizations within that have been more active. So you're seeing all of these regulators in not just the U.S., but other countries who are kind of aggressively going after corporations. I mean, heck, don't even talk about China. What's happened in China with the government and companies there is like next level. But yeah, I mean, I think that we're all kind of feeling a little bit of the pressure and you know, the scrutiny, and you know, you could argue good or bad, but you know, either way, it's there, and it's something, you know, I think we're all trying to do better. So you know, to the extent it makes us better, fine. But it does feel like sometimes it's just they keep moving the goalpost, right?
Yeah.
It's like you feel like you caught up, and then they're like, well, we're going to do something. It's not enough, right?
Yeah.
So now people probably say the same thing about internal audit, right? Like, oh, you audited me 3 years ago, and you said it was all I had to do was these things, and now you're telling me I got to do more, right? So
there's more of this.
Just
us
being motivated. So
I know when I was in public, obviously every year the PCAOB would come out and go, hey, you got to do this differently or do this. And then each firm would go, okay, this is how we're going to handle it. I hated having those conversations with clients. I would just go, look, I'll be honest, I don't agree with this either. And I'm not 100% sure the firm as a whole agrees with this approach either, or the why behind it. But our hands are kind of tied as the PCAOB. So I threw them under the bus constantly and like, okay, well, I get it. So let's figure out some kind of solution to how we can get this thing going.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They get to make the rules, right? And so we all have to play by the rules. So, I mean, it's interesting. I remember I was at a company before, and they had one of the basketball stars come in and give a little talk about, you know, basically how do you deal with referees? And as I think the point was, those are our referees.
Yeah.
So they may not like the call, and you may say the call is completely wrong. And, you know, you can probably relate to this for football, college football. You know, the refs do not always get it right.
Right.
But they get to call it. And so you're stuck with the call that they make, right? So.
All right. I like that analogy. That's super interesting. All right. I've always been curious as from like the leader perspective, the chief audit executive perspective, when you have to deal with the C-suite, the board, the audit committee chair, your staff, your senior managers, et cetera, those relationships are a little different. You know, the same way I have a different relationship with my best friend that I've known since I was 5 years old. I talk to him a little bit differently than I talk to my mother or a prospect or a client or something like that. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. When you think about the way that communication works and the relationships, right? So I always talk about you have to build relationships of trust. And so building relationships of trust where you're comfortable having conversations with people, right? I think you start that out by sharing. And I tell our team that all the time. It's like, if you want to build a relationship with somebody, share some information. What is it that you have that they can benefit them that you can share with them about what they're doing? So if I think about, and those conversations look very different, right? The level of communication that you have, you think about through the people that are being audited, the auditee, it's at a very granular level. Now, when you start talking with their boss or their boss's boss, obviously you have to think about, okay, it's a much, that 30-minute discussion needs to be able to condense down into 5 minutes, right? And if you think about the audit committee chair, that conversation needs to be 2 sentences, right? And so you've got to tailor that message for different people at different levels, at the same time still trying to get the message across, right? So I think you got that. But I think for me, when I think about building relationships, I think with the team, you need to share as much as you can with them. And you can't always share everything, but I think that builds trust with your team where they're like, okay, this person, is willing to share with me what's going on, give me some insight. I also think building the relationships with your team, lots of people do one-on-ones, but I just like to say, hey, what's going on? Like, great, we talk about work, what's going on in your life? What else is important to you, right? And it's different for different people because we got all kinds of people that, that you work with that are not similar to me, that have different values than me, that have different interests than I do. So I think building those relationships, but then that relationship of trust is really built around, like, I think just sharing information. Like, I think as we lead up to an audit committee meeting, it's like I go to the CFO well in advance. I think people do this, CAEs typically, and just go, hey, let me share with you what's going on. But also not just the CFO, but let's share with other leaders in the company. May not totally relate to their space, but at least give them some perspective. Here's the 20 projects we're working on. Here's the 3 that impact your space. But let me just give you a sense of these other things that maybe tangentially may interact with your team so that you have some sense of what's going on. I think when you share information in a collaborative way like that, people are way more interested in working with you in the future.
So show up and try, and then relationships of trust, and these, the show up and try is something you've been carrying with you for 10 years. So it's not this, hey, I'm going to be on this podcast, let me try to make something that make this sound good. And, maybe you don't really live it, what you're saying. I 100% believe that what you're saying is what you live. And this isn't just, let me just say this for the sake of this podcast thing. Where does all that come from? Like, almost philosophically, is philosophy in general important to you? Like, where does this mindset that you have come from?
It's an interesting question. I mean, my first thing that pops into my head is, your family, right? My parents raised me a certain way. I grew up in the South. I'm from Georgia. My parents raised me a certain way. There's certain values that I think they've instilled. I went to a church, right? There's certain values that are instilled in that, right? There's some faith-based thing as well. And I don't think it has to be Christian. It could be any faith, right? There's going to instill certain sets of values. And I think for most religions, you would say that those are very, very positive things to build up for your life, right? And your philosophy. So I don't know. I think some of it comes from that. I mean, you think about like a work ethic. I think a lot of that comes from there. And you see other people that have been successful. We've all had great mentors in our life where you kind of look at them and say, wow, there's a guy, Harry Gillespie. Just quick side note. So this guy, when I was kind of a rebellious youth, he was like a church leader, but he wasn't a church leader. He worked actually for Ernst & Young. He was a manager at the time. And he volunteered and helped out for like the older guys, right? And, we'd do sports activities and whatever. And he just took an interest in several of us. And just like he had us all come over his house one night and, his wife's there and he gets up in the morning and he makes us waffles. You know what I mean? It's like, sounds kind of stupid, but like as a teenager, I was like, this is kind of cool. This guy's like trying to make a difference on us. And it had such a big impact on me. I still talk to Carrie all the time. At least once a year I reach out to him, but he's had such a big impact. I think he's part of the reason why I ended up working for Ernst & Young is I was like, Carrie's awesome. I want to be like, right? And so, because you just kind of look at people, but I think that's part of it as well, right? So you can have these things your parents teach you. You can have your faith-based items that you have, But then it's people that have this impact and these relationships that are mentors or people that you look up to.
Got it. Okay. That's interesting. Thank you for sharing. I also wish I had a cool story why I joined Ernst & Young, but they were voted #1 place to start your career when I graduated. So I went, yeah, let's just go there. That sounds good. Where else is better?
A quick funny story on that. When I started my first day in the office, there's 20 staff ones or whatever, and we're all talking about, I'm not going to call out the person in particular, but this one particular, we're all saying why we came to EY or whatever. And this person said, well, I looked at the client list. I saw Harley Davidson. I said, it's good enough for Harley Davidson. It's good enough for me.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. All right. Okay. So what do you want to leave the audience with? I think there's been some nuggets of wisdom that I feel like you only get from a grandfather or your grandmother or something like that. But, and that's not a knock on your age. You're not, I don't think you're that old, but.
To be honest, I am a grandfather. I have 5 grandkids. So that fits. That
fits. It fits. All right. It fits. All right. You're the Southern grandfather, the knowledgeable Southern grandfather. All right. So with that said, what maybe words of wisdom or anything else that you want to leave the audience with?
I would say I heard this quote one time. It said, "No success at work can compensate for failure in the home." And that's kind of stuck with me for a long time, right? And it's because we all want to be successful at work, and that is all great. But the most important things and the most important relationships we have are our family. Now, I would also say family as however you define that, right? Family looks different for lots of different people. We have lots of different looking families, right? So I won't even get into all the iterations of what that might be, but however you define your family, that is probably one of the most important things for me it's been, and I think for people. When you think about when you retire, when you get to the end of your career and you hear, and I've been to, I'm at that age now where I go to retirement parties where people are, kind of at the end of their career. Nobody cares about the projects you worked on. What they care about are the people. So they care about the people that you've worked with, those relationships at work. But then also what they also focus on is their family. Like I said, however you define family, spouse, kids, your extended family, nieces, nephews, significant other, however you want to define that. But that's what they look back at and say, hey, these are the most important things. And having that person along the journey with them, and then the people that they work with, the relationships that they've had with the people that they've worked on, not the projects, but it's the people. So I would just say that's the thing to think about as you're, especially earlier in your career and you're trying to figure out hey, what's important? Relationships with people are the most important. And the funny thing is, it's not always the relationships you think from a work perspective, because people start like, oh, I need to meet the CFO or the vice president of this or the partner of that. Those people are going to be retired before it even matters for you. What really is important is the people that you're working with. So the people you start with, then 15 years from now, those are going to be the relationships that matter the most, because those people that you started out with are going to be the CFOs. They're going to be the partners. They're going to be the whatever, vice president of whatever. And that's the relationship that you should focus on. The people 5 years ahead of you, 5 years behind you.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.